My name is Nikolai. I'm a product manager for so-called mechatronic design area. I'm responsible for defining requirements and priorities for Altium MCAD CoDesigner, and responsible for some other things as well here at Altium, in particular for the mechanical or mechatronic part of multi-board design for the viewers of multi-board projects. As for the background, I'm a mechanical engineer. And we decided to organize this webinar. This actually is not a webinar, it's a more Q&A session, just in order to answer the frequently asked questions, the questions with the answers which are not well yet documented in the documentation, in our videos, in our materials, and so on, and to answer your questions, which you posted when you decided to join this webinar. So first, I will answer the frequently asked questions which I collected, and then I will switch to the questions which you posted. The MCAD CoDesigner is a tool which is used for the direct integration between ECAD and MCAD. It allows to make changes to the PCB design using the native tools in MCAD and in ECAD accordingly, and allows to avoid any file exchange. That's I think enough, and allows to bring more data, more PCB data to the mechanical CAD. More data, I mean the data like the representation of 3D copper and so on and so on. Now let me switch directly to the questions. There are a lot of questions which I wanted to answer. The questions which I collected again, and the questions which you posted, and your potential new questions which you will most probably post in Q&A window in Zoom. Please use it for posting your questions. I already introduced myself and the product briefly. Where to find help? The first question. So this is the documentation about Altium CoDesigner. So as you can see, altium.com, documentation, Altium CoDesigner. It's quite easy to access it. You can access it from here, from resources and support on the main Altium page. Apart from the documentation itself, it includes video tutorials, the page with the video tutorials, which answer some of the questions and clarify some of the use cases of the usage of MCAD CoDesigner. Next one is the recordings of the webinar, including the recording of this webinar, which is going to be published soon, I believe right after we finish this webinar. By the way, let me double check if, okay, the recording is in progress. Good. Next source or the place for exchanging your thoughts, your suggestions, your questions is the forum. Please feel free to join. It is available for everyone. You can easily navigate from this one as well to the forum, then to MCAD CoDesigner directly from altium.com. And here in Altium CoDesigner section, please feel free to ask your questions, to post your suggestions, and so on, and to post your complaints, and so on and so on. So people or our development team will answer. I hope soon. We are getting notifications about new posts and new answers, so this is quite a good way of interacting with the development in particular. Bugcrunch is one more way of interacting with the development. You can post your ideas, your suggestions, or You can post your complaints about the bugs you found and so on and so on in Bug Crunch here. So one more source. Support, obviously the traditional way of addressing Altium. Please feel free to ask your questions in the live chat window. Most probably you will be switched to one of our experts, but in any case, the support ticket will be created for your request. And this is the best way for keeping things transparent for everyone, for you, for support team, and for the development team. If the support people reached out to us, to the development team. What else I wanted to share in this section, in the section of the general questions? What's new in the product? I would like, by the way, you can also navigate to the new in CoDesigner page and see what was published with every version of CoDesigner. For example, with the version 3.4, we published the professional solution for Siemens NX and some other enhancements and bug fixes. But as for the developments done last year, I would mention two key things. This is the multi-board support, which is currently done and provided for SolidWorks users only. But it's going to be provided for Creo users soon as well, and for other MCADs a bit later this year. It allows to synchronize the entire multi-board assemblies with the MCAD and allows not to spend time building multi-board assemblies in multi-board projects in Altium CoDesigner. In Altium Designer. Altium CoDesigner does that job for you. One more big feature is the support for rigid flex, and in particular rigid flex boards, and the support for rigid flex 2.0 mode. We added this last year. It is available for SolidWorks and Creo users. The support for other MCADs is on the roadmap, but I cannot promise you that it will be done soon, because now we are focused on what I just wanted to share with you. What is delayed? Unfortunately, despite of even the fact that we promised some of these features to be developed recently, but haven't done it yet because of the lack of resources. Well, we all know that the situations like this. What is delayed? The support for folders representation in MCAD. As you know, when you are searching for PCBs, CoDesigner provides just a flat list of PCBs, which is not that comfortable for navigating in it. Many people are requesting the support for folders. Yes, it is planned. Hope it will be developed soon. Countersink, counterbore holes, we are getting requests for support. We do not support it currently. It is again on the roadmap. It's not going to be done in the next version of CoDesigner, which is going to be published in June. Hope it will be done in the version after next, which is going to be published in September. But the good news is that CoDesigner does not break the countersink counterbore holes in Altium Designer, so they are kept alive, and there is a workaround with countersink counterbore holes. If you really need to represent them in MCAD, please just set up their parameters manually. And some enhancements to the native MCAD component placements are also moved in our schedule for future. What is coming soon? As for the big features, the support for harness design, I would like to mention it. This is the biggest improvement which we are planning to deliver in June. I believe as beta. We are currently developing it for PTC Creo and already reached some good results. So we can now exchange the design of harness created in Altium Designer with PTC Creo, and assuming that mechanical engineer defines the design of cables and harnesses in 3D space in MCAD, we now can transfer the information about physical length of the key information, actually, the information about physical length of cables and wires and harnesses back to ECAD. The support for other MCADs will be done afterwards. Next portion of questions, sharing and collaborating in general. First question about inviting and including external mechanical engineers into your workflow. Fortunately or unfortunately, rather unfortunately, external mechanical engineers should be included as workspace members into Altium Workspace. This is safe enough because mechanical engineers do not access the PCB projects, despite the fact that the PCB projects should be shared for editing with the mechanical engineers. Mechanical engineers can only change or create the ECAD MCAD exchange data, not the PCB documents themselves. And please, when you are inviting mechanical engineers, please do not forget about server-side option for sharing new projects in order not to allow the external mechanical engineers to see all of your projects and to see only the projects shared with them explicitly. That's it about this point. We know about this issue. We are getting requests about the ability to share with external mechanical engineers without inviting them into the workspace. In fact, it's on the roadmap, but I cannot tell you when when exactly it's going to be done. I am afraid it's not in this year, because some architectural changes should be done for this specific purpose. Next point, where to start creating a PCB. People are often asking a question if it is possible technically, and if it is good enough from the logical point of view to start creating PCBs in MCAD. I would say, and I would recommend you, I would strongly recommend you to start creating PCBs in ECAD first. So please just simply create a blank PCB, specify the layer stack, and send that blank PCB, maybe even with the key components like connectors placed in the random place, send it to MCAD, then insert that PCB into the device assembly, shape it according to the shape of the mechanical enclosure, place the components to the right position, specify or create mounting holes, and send it back. This is the simplest flow. Technically, it is possible to create PCBs within the existing PCB projects in MCAD, and it is possible to create new PCB projects in MCAD as well. But in that case, you will not be able to use your project templates. You will not able to specify the board thickness because it is defined by the layer stack, which is specified in ECAD. And the user experience on ECAD side will be quite unusual, I would say, especially for the beginners, because again, a mechanical engineer does not access the PCB data, the PCB documents. Mechanical engineer only creates the exchange data. So electrical engineer will need to create a PCB and only after that apply changes coming from MCAD. It's a bit unusual, especially for the beginners, as I said. So back to the point, I would strongly recommend you to start designing, to start collaborating from ECAD side. Next question, synchronizing changes between mechanical engineers. The best way to synchronize changes on the PCB design is by using a PDM system or any other, let's say, storage of mechanical information, mechanical designs. If you don't have it, then you can obviously exchange the data through ECAD. So you can push the PCB design, let's say, from mechanical engineer A, then to ECAD, then pull the changes from ECAD, pull the PCB design from ECAD on the PC of mechanical engineer B, but please keep in mind that the mechanical dimensions and constraints will be lost because there are no mechanical dimensions and constraints in ECAD. And same point with the usage of the different mechanical CADs. You can, of course, exchange the PCB design through ECAD, but please keep in mind that the dimensions and constraints you created in MCAD will be lost. Well, it's not a disaster, of course. You can easily restore them or even proceed without creating or restoring them. Yes, it is possible. Please just keep it in mind. And related question, is it possible to clone a PCB in MCAD without losing the mechanical constraints and dimensions? Yes, it is possible. Just substitute the reference to the PCB project in the PCB assembly. It is stored in the properties of PCB assembly. You can open the properties, see the reference, and substitute it, or actually redirect it to the new PCB project, and all your mechanical dimensions and constraints will be obviously kept alive. This is a trick. By the way, if you want to clarify this point or any other point deeper, please feel free to ask your questions here in Q&A session, in Q&A window, or please feel free to contact me directly after this webinar is finished. I will share my email address. Next portion, components, the work with components, and quite a, I wouldn't say common, but frequently faced issue, broken models and broken parts of models. The flow with transferring the models, with transferring the geometry is explained in this video, in one of the video tutorials. It is called Fixing Broken Component Models. This video explains what happens with the models stored in the footprints in ECAD and how CoDesigner works with them, why in some cases the geometry is lost and how to fix it. And just to mention, CoDesigner uses parasolid format for transferring models from ECAD to MCAD and back, by the way, if we are talking about the models of mechanical enclosure. Next question, model naming. The name of each model transferred from ECAD to MCAD consists of 3 parts. Always. The first part is the footprint name. The second part is the the component ID or a custom component parameter. You can customize it, you can specify it. And the last part of the name is the component revision. All three parts are important for us for handling changes, because we cannot rely on the usage of PDM system on the MCAD side. This is why we rely on revision. And this is why we are creating new models, in fact, new models, when a new revision of component is created. And why it is important for us to work with the components. This is because of transferring component properties. We are transferring component properties. So this is why a component is always a combination of component and footprint. There is a redundancy with the component models on MCAD side. For example, for two capacitors which have different parameters but have the same geometry, CoDesigner will create two different models. If you want to reduce or to avoid that redundancy, you can use our mechanism of ECAD to MCAD linkage or mapping, and CoDesigner will simply use the models stored in your PDM system according to the references. It is supported for SolidWorks, Creo, and Siemens NX. Accordingly, next point, performance and filtering small components out. A CoDesigner allows to filter small components out because mechanical engineers, in many cases, especially on the initial stage or in the intermediate stage of the PCB design, do not need those components. Please do not forget about that option. You can easily set it up and use it. And we are thinking about providing more options, in particular, providing an option to filter the components out based on the component types. I hope it will be developed soon, but not in the new version, not in the version 3.5. The current version is 3.4. The new version is 3.5, and so on. Next question, the placement of components to the copper. The components are placed to the copper, not to the solder mask, and accordingly, they are colliding with the solder mask layer in the MCAD, which is technically correct. Well, not technically, rather logically correct, because in the reality, the components are placed to the copper. But MCADs, if you are doing collision checks in MCADs, MCAD will warn you about this collision. Please just keep it in mind. As a workaround, you can manually decrease the thickness of the PCB in MCAD, and the corresponding option to hide solder mask thickness is coming soon. To be honest, I don't remember if it is included into the plan for 3.5. If not, then it will be included into the next version, because it is very simple for us to implement it. Next question, native component linkage. And please do not reuse the models coming from ECAD. Do not reuse them for doing MCAD to ECAD placement or for the native linkage, because they have different origins and they have the references to the ECAD origination in the properties. So the best way of reusing the models which are already included into ECAD footprints is to extract them from ECAD footprints. So I would strongly not recommend to reuse models coming from ECAD. And Next, and the final question about the components, what to do with the mechanical components like radiators, like I don't know, small fasteners, if you are using them, if they are included into the PC, if they are a part of PCB assembly. I would strongly recommend to consider them as components in ECAD, and even to create symbols for such components, and even to place those symbols to the schematic. It is important for the MCAD component placement handled by MCAD CoDesigner, and it is important for handling bill of materials in ECAD properly. Okay, let's go to the next portion, modeling in MCAD, modeling itself. First of all, I would strongly recommend you to work in context of device, make changes in the context of device, create references from the enclosure or to enclosure, and specify the enclosure for your electrical counterparts. It is very useful, it is very easy, and it is really helpful for the electrical designers, because you give them the possibility to check the device layout and to exclude or to avoid collisions or potential collisions at the early stages of the PCB design and key, and you will allow them to keep in mind stuff like, I don't know, heating and cooling circumstances and so on. So it is pretty useful. I would strongly recommend you to work in context of device assembly and to exchange the enclosure. There is a video, a very short video explaining how to do that. And by the way, if you have multiple PCBs in your device, and if you are not using multi-board assemblies and not intending to use multi-board assemblies, you can refer to PCB-B as an enclosure for PCB-A, and vice versa. So the entire PCBs can be transferred as part of enclosure from MCAD to ECAD, but I would say it's rather a workaround. The proper way of doing things is to create multi-board assemblies, of course. Next question, how to keep mechanical dimensions and constraints alive, quite a common issue. The problem is that as soon as electrical engineer makes changes made changes to the board outline in ECAD, CoDesigner then will redraw the board outline, redraw the entire contour. In MCAD, CoDesigner is not that smart, and it means that CoDesigner will actually, well, not CoDesigner, but rather your MCAD will lose the references to the edges, and your mechanical dimensions and constraints will be lost. The solution is to make changes to the board shape on MCAD side only. It is described in the documentation, and there is a link to the portion of the documentation where it is described. Please also keep in mind that not all of the, I would say, typical MCAD features are supported by CoDesigner, unfortunately, because the definition of PCB in ECAD is two-dimensional, whereas the MCAD design is always three-dimensional. So CoDesigner cannot currently support features like 3D chamfers and fillets, unfortunately. They should be included into the board sketch directly. Yes, it's not a disaster. It is just a thing to be kept in mind. And even if you made a mistake and created stuff like this, CoDesigner will warn you on push from MCAD to ECAD. This is just to be kept in mind. There are other features as well. For example, patterns, which we are getting complaints from time to time. Yes, we do not support transferring and recognizing and interpreting patterns created on MCAD side. So please create stuff like mounting holes individually, not by patterning them. Again, just to be kept in mind, there are workarounds for each of those cases. Origins is the next point. As you probably know, there are two origins in ECAD, absolute and relative. CoDesigner builds the PCB initially in MCAD according to the absolute ECAD's origin. In other words, the PCB is always in the positive coordinates, but you can change it in MCAD so that your mechanical origin is somewhere in the middle of your PCB or in the center of one of the mounting holes and so on. It is all possible. CoDesigner will take that into consideration, and if you moved a part of your board into the negative coordinates, CoDesigner will show the mechanical origin in ECAD by a special origin mark. And the flow is described in one of the video tutorials again. What about creating links or referring from or to PCB geometry? You can, if you are using mechanical design methodologies like skeletal modeling or similar, or if you want to create PCB patterns in MCAD, or vice versa, or let's go back from the enclosure to the mechanical design, you can build any references, any external references. The only thing to be kept in mind is please do not break the structure of the board assembly. Do not break the structure of the board part created by CoDesigner. Do not unfix board part within the board assembly, and do not redefine the datum planes. CoDesigner uses front plane for drawing the board outline. Please do not try to redefine it. You will just break your design. But again, all the external references are possible from or to PCB. There is one more trick I wanted to share with you. As you probably know, CoDesigner allows to specify the board areas, keep out area in particular, and so-called text note room area, which is used for specifying any custom requirements, any custom text requirements from the side of mechanical engineer. You can use synchronizing keep outs for specifying the copper geometry, the copper regions and copper polygons in ECAD. Just use keep outs for that. You can create a keep out, send it from MCAD to ECAD, and then your electrical counterpart will simply transform that keep out to the copy region. This is pretty simple. And again, this is just a trick, which, by the way, I got quite a long time ago from one of the users. So users are telling us what the tricks are, which they are following. Next portion of topics of frequently asked questions: rigid flex design. As I mentioned, it is supported for SolidWorks and PTC Creo. Please keep in mind that there are two modes of rigid flex design according to the modes of design in Altium Designer 1.0 and 2.0. They are different in some aspects. The differences are described in the documentation following this link. Of course, rigid flex 2 mode is more powerful, but currently, it does not allow to build new bands on MCAD side, which is pretty important. I would say critically important. But there is a workaround. You can create, let's say, the drafts of bands in ECAD, transfer them to MCAD, and then mechanical engineer will simply adjust them according to the space limits and so on, and to transfer the design back. Visibility of decals in SolidWorks. Sometimes the decals are not visible in SolidWorks. Decals are the bitmap pictures representing the copper, the silkscreen, and the solder mask. Sometimes they cannot be represented because of the settings of SolidWorks and because of how SolidWorks is working with the hardware, with the video cards. SolidWorks has its own requirements to the video cards, but if you face this issue, it's not again not a disaster. It can be easily fixed by changing the corresponding setting in SolidWorks. So if you don't see the picture like this, please just navigate to the documentation and see how to solve this issue. It is pretty simple. The decals in Autodesk Fusion 360, there are no decals in Autodesk Fusion 360 because their API does not allow to create them. Instead of the decals, we are bringing the sketches of copper and silkscreen, which, by the way, may be even better in some aspects because you can refer to that geometry or from that geometry to some external entities like your mechanical enclosure. Those decals can be shown easily by clicking the corresponding button in Autodesk, in CoDesigner ribbon in Autodesk Fusion, or can be hidden. That's up to you. Please just keep it in mind that there are no decals in Autodesk Fusion. Instead, we are representing the copper and silkscreen in form of sketches. Working with SolidWorks PDM is pretty important section. I would like to spend some time explaining it. Again, it is described in the documentation. What are the most important things? First, I would recommend you to establish or to create the common component folder and to keep that folder under control of PDM. And to follow the recommendations described here. The first question, what should be checked out when you are going to make changes to your PCB design from ECAD to MCAD? Well, in fact, everything except for components can be checked out. Here are the recommendations. What should be checked out depends on your situation, depends on the type of the board, depends on if the 3D copper is built or not. The only optional thing is the PNGs which represent decals. It's not necessary to check them in and out of PDM. But if you decide to check everything in and out, it is fine. Again, except for components. Normally, it's not necessary to check the components out before you are pulling changes from ECAD. What is the typical problem with the components and why SolidWorks tries to force you to check them out? This is because of the component properties. In many cases, SolidWorks, or rather SolidWorks PDM, changes the proper on saving the models in the storage. They are changing the properties of models like typically description and material. And those properties are not in sync with the corresponding properties in ECAD libraries. So CoDesigner will detect that and will suggest to make changes, and accordingly SolidWorks will suggest you to check them out or to save them with a different name. Normally it shouldn't happen. Please first try to clarify why the rules for the libraries on two sides are different. This is the key point. But if you don't want to clarify it, if you don't want to synchronize the libraries, the simple suggestion is to disable the corresponding change in Altium CoDesigner. CoDesigner shows those changes. CoDesigner shows the details of those changes, and CoDesigner tells what is the potential reason and what to do if you face the situation like this. Again, it is not necessary to check the models out before doing pull in SolidWorks. All right, and the last question, last point I wanted to show you a little bit is the synchronization of multi-board assemblies. Just to be kept in mind, CoDesigner synchronizes only the location and the orientation of PCBs and the elements of mechanical enclosure in space. When you are synchronizing multi-board assemblies, CoDesigner does not synchronize the content of PCBs. The content of PCBs or the PCBs themselves should be synchronized separately. That's actually all I wanted to bring. Now I'm going to answer the questions you posted before you joined this, or when you decided to join this webinar. Okay, let me go through those questions briefly, and then I will go to your questions posted in Q&A window. I just marked the questions bold, the questions which I wanted to answer. First one, the problem with pulling the boards with the components in Fusion 360. Sometimes not full set of components is coming from ECAD to the PCB assembly in Fusion 360. The solution, or rather the workaround, is to pull again. The second suggestion from my side is to filter small components out, to set that filter. And next question is to address support in this particular case. So I don't know why those mechanical layers are created. So please address support and try to solve it with the support. I marked the questions which are answered in the slides in my presentation by the green color, so I will not answer them. Next question, usage of ECAD MCAD CoDesigner outside of Altium 365. Unfortunately, you cannot use CoDesigner fully locally. CoDesigner requires Altium server. You can use your on-premise Altium server. Now it is provided under Altium Enterprise subscription, so you can establish your own workspace and host it behind your firewall, your corporate firewall, and use it. But in any case, CoDesigner requires Altium server, cloud server or on-premise server. Next question, overall use of CoDesigner. How parts are stored when importing new PCB into MCAD tool, like SolidWorks, common parameters used to link? To be honest, the question is not clear, but I hope I answered it. And in addition, CoDesigner stores the parasolid models, which are used as an intermediate models for transferring the models. So from ECAD to MCAD, CoDesigner stores them on MCAD side as well. And when CoDesigner creates the PCB assembly, CoDesigner, or rather your MCAD tool, produces the native models from those intermediate parasolid models. Next one, overall use. Oh, sorry, already answered. Next, I'm a SolidWorks side, and I would like to know what's the ideal pipeline flow, and the collaboration includes material. This is quite a huge topic. I agree that all what is mentioned here should be taken into consideration, but I'm afraid it's too big to discuss at our webinar. I would be happy to discuss it afterwards by organizing by organizing next some kind of special webinars or just individually. Next one, setting up and changing the outline, which side? I hope I answered all the questions except the fourth, how to indicate stack up thickness. To be honest, I haven't got it. To be honest, I have no idea what was kept in mind here. Again, the layer thickness is defined in ECAD according to the layer. So the layers, the board thickness is defined by the layer stack. That's it. You can change it in MCAD, but CoDesigner will not apply it. CoDesigner will warn electrical engineer about such change. Next one, method to use ECAD MCAD without any type of server. Okay, already answered. Already answered. What are the limitations for reference designator? To be honest, the question is not clear. Reference designator placement versus layer stack up region. Could you please, if you are here, could you please clarify your question in Q&A window, or we can discuss it individually later. Can you please show how the filtering by height in SolidWorks takes the value defined? Okay, I asked our specialists for reproducing this issue. They answered that they cannot reproduce it. They made several attempts and they cannot reproduce it, but we may be doing something wrong. So I would recommend you to address support, first of all, if you are seeing that something does not work as expected. But in this particular case, we cannot reproduce it. So please address support, or again, please address me directly afterwards. Step file size management and EPDM part and so on. CoDesigner does not use step, well, there is no, in my opinion, there is no issue with the size and with the step model exchange and with the performance of the step models, because step format is not used by CoDesigner. Next one, what causes unable to save model to exchange format? It means that some of the geometry cannot be converted to parasolid format. Unfortunately, sometimes in quite seldom cases it happens. Yes, as you mentioned, the issue can be solved by using broken model way of solving. The issue is on Altium Designer side. No quick solution, unfortunately. Which license is required to use the copier export settings? Pro or enterprise license is required. You can easily check what is included into the standard subscription. Okay, this one. So you can easily check what is included into the standard Pro or enterprise subscription. Mechanical MCAD integration. So everything is explained here. You can clarify what does it mean and so on and so on. So the information is here. And back to the question, professional subscription is required. What is important in the creation process of new components in Altium to make sure that the components are recognized later? This question is about what happens when the changes are made on the CAD side. I already answered in the presentation. New models are created. So we do not work with the version control system on PDM side. We are simply producing new models. This is the answer. Can CoDesigner now handle non-standard precision, or I believe it's rather called accuracy in Creo? CoDesigner, the answer is that CoDesigner sets its own accuracy settings for PCB parts. We spent a lot of time on experimenting with this and decided to proceed with this behavior. But it is related only to the PCB parts. We do not touch your parts, your design. Exchange of flex PCBs, yes, it is possible with Creo. Next one, assignment of rights. Can a mechanical engineer pass on the rights? No, unfortunately, mechanical engineer cannot set up the permissions. Only if a mechanical engineer is an administrator in your workspace. Next one, can an existing SolidWorks board be used? Yes, it can be used. It is described in one of the videos. So the models can be reused. Your old models can be, or inherited models can be reused. Does SolidWorks board need to be constructed on the front? Yes, I already mentioned it. It is important to keep the definition of board relatively to the datum planes. Next question, best way to integrate create lightweight PCBs for MCAD user SolidWorks. Push whole PCB from Altium, then hide, or push MCAD variant. I believe it was a point rather about ECAD variant. Yes, both ways will work. And as I mentioned, filtering small components out and in future filtering components by type will help. But technically, yes, they will work. And by the way, this topic is was discussed recently on forum. Where is the master 3D data of the component stored? It is in ECAD. It is in ECAD, unless you are using ECAD MCAD linkage. Why are there no European schematic symbols? This is a question from one of the users from Europe, and I noted it for passing to my colleagues here internally. Next one, the technical question about errors. Please contact support. Receiving message object reference, please contact support. Modifying, by the way, if you see that support does not help, please post your question on forum, because the development team are monitoring forums, unlike the support database. So if you see that support cannot help you, please feel free to post your question or complaint on forum directly. Forum is the fastest way, by the way, and maybe the most efficient way of solving the issues. The only disadvantage is that it's not transparent, it's not formal, and so on. So forum is forum. Modifying 3D model on Altium component, already answered. It is about the same question about creating new models in case of modifying components on ECAD side. So yes, new models are created. Best practice to use, quite a complex question, consists of many parts. Best practice to use MCAD masters to drive component position in CoDesigner. I believe this is a question about the usage of the mechanical methodologies of the design, like skeleton modeling. Yes, it is possible. I already answered, I hope. Potential changes to the board thickness, already answered as well. Planes, answered. Can mechanical engineer start board outline? Yes, again, technically it is possible, but I would not recommend it. I would recommend to start in ECAD. Can mechanical engineer rename files? Yes. By the way, good question. Mechanical engineer can rename the board assembly and the board part pulled from ECAD, because CoDesigner keeps using the internal IDs anyway. Do you need to have the same naming scheme? No, it's not required. How to rename? Manually. Just rename manually on both sides. Altium creates new folder and files when push and pull. This can lead to messy. No, there is no workaround. That's the way it is, and the way of how it works currently is reasonable for different, I would say, cases. It is also discussed. It was discussed on forum. I answered this question previously on forum. Is PCB thickness all driven by, I guess, driven by ECAD? Yes, the answer is correct. The answer is, this is correct. It is always driven by ECAD side. How assemble flex PCB in non-planar surfaces? By using non-parallel bands. This is the answer. And if you have a couple of minutes, I will go through your questions posted in Q&A window. Could you thread unspecified component height separately from 0? I'm afraid currently we cannot thread unspecified component height separately from 0 height, but noted the question. Let me talk to our developers. Let me clarify it. Thanks for bringing this. Next question. If ECAD does not specify component height, then when I set the filter as 0.5 millimeters, it filters out the components with, okay, this is the clarification. Okay, thanks for clarification. And again, let me discuss it. Internally, the folders option on either earlier side, the folders option in an earlier side, does that imply that we will be able to use ECAD MCAD from shared network folder along with Altium 365? Yes. Yes, the answer is yes, you will be able. And next question, reference designator versus layer stack up region. Okay, this is the clarification to one of the questions. I had issues pushing components to MCAD because my reference designator from a rigid stack up region were placed in a flex region. And okay, clear. And I have no clear answer to this. I have to contact. Okay, noted. Let me talk to our engineers internally. I'm going to reach out to you later with the answer. Thanks for posting. And we just ran out of time. I hope it's not the last Q&A session, Q&A webinar. I hope we will conduct more in future. Here is my email address. Please feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions or suggestions or complaints, and so on and so on. Thanks everyone for joining, for participating. Hope this information was useful for you, and see you. Bye. Thanks.